In 3 minutes. That's... Okay. Sorry about that. So many people, so few HD cameras to cover them. So we're going to be moving on to our next panel, and for those of you who have any history with imprint, you'll realize that design is always kind of core to our philosophy and the narratives that we present. And we do that because design is the interface that we all use to interact with culture, to interact with art, to interact with entertainment. So it's part and parcel of what we do. So having said that, the next two speakers are icons of design, and there's really no other way to put it. They are sort of the harbingers of the New York design scene for the last 20 years, and we are very happy to have them. Our first speaker for the Design Pathfinders is Chip Kidd. And again, to try and condense Chip's resume into 20 seconds would be a huge disservice, so let me just say this. He has written articles for pretty much every publication you've ever wanted to read. His illustration and art and design have been featured in almost every design publication you'd ever want to look at. And his work for Knopf Books is, in short, award-winning. Beyond that, he is an artist, an illustrator, a percussionist, and I believe a singer. So apparently the man doesn't sleep very much. But we are very excited to have him. Along with Chip in discussion today, we have Paula Scher. Paula is principal and partner at Pentagram Design, which pretty much should say it all. She has designed the faces of some of the most well-known and reputable corporate brands in the world. Her art has been featured in numerous, like Chip's, design and art publications. And along with Chip, she represents, again, sort of the pantheon of New York graphic design. So we are very happy to have them here. Please join me in welcoming Chip Kidd and Paula Scher.
Hello. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I was worried that we were going to outnumber you.
We almost do.
It's happened. All right, I'm just going to run through a bunch of recent work, all book covers. I mostly do book covers. There are various other projects I get that aren't book covers, but there isn't really time to go into that. So one of the authors... One of the authors that I've worked with for years is Augustin Burroughs. He's known as the Running with Scissors guy, which I did not design, but then we became friends after that book came out, and so I designed his next book after that, which was called This. Now, this is his memoir of being a hotshot ad exec on Madison Avenue in his 20s and a raging alcoholic, which I know all sounds redundant, but still, this was a problem. So his colleagues did an intervention, and they said, you are going to rehab, and or you will be fired and you will die. So he very reluctantly went into rehab because he didn't think he had a problem. So the concept on this cover is to how to make a typography look like it's in denial. And this is the most low-tech solution I could possibly do. This is setting the type up in Quark and printing it out on an Epson printer with water-soluble ink, taping it up on the wall, getting a bucket of water, and throwing it at it. Literally, that is what this is. And so Augustin tells an amusing story of being in an airport, and his flight was delayed, so he hung out in the bookstore to see if they were selling his books, and of course they always are. And a woman came up to this, and she picked it up, and she squinted at it, and she went to the counter, and she said, "This one's ruined." And the guy behind the counter said, "I know, lady, they all came in that way." Augustin's next book was called This, and he told me this over the phone, and I said, well, I know what I'm going to do for the cover. And he said, what? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm a terrible lawyer for my work. When I do a book cover and it goes out into a bookstore or on the web or what have you, it really doesn't matter what I have to say about it, because at that point it's too late. It's all about whether it works for you as a viewer or not. So I'd much rather show a finished thing than do a sketch or describe it. So I got this idea, and I contacted a photographer that I do a lot of work with named Jeff Spear, just over here in Soho. And we put an ad in the Village Voice for a very specific kind of hand model, and we got a couple of crank responses, but then we finally found the right guy. He was very pleased to get this job. He doesn't get a lot of work as a hand model. And so I sent this, it was a freelance job, so I sent this to the art director, and then he very quickly got back to me and said, our marketing department loves it, and the reason they love it is because it's yellow and it has a hand on it. Period. Now, a lot of that story is total bullshit. That is my hand, and we added an extra finger on it in Photoshop, and Jeff's a Photoshop whiz, and blah, 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 blah. Several weeks after the book came out, Augustin got an email from a fan, a woman from Phoenix, Arizona, and she said, when I saw this book in the bookstore, I burst into tears because I realized that I was not alone. This is not a Photoshop trick, this is real, and I want to know where she was when we were doing the book jacket in the first place. My favorite thing about this slide is the 30% off sticker, which of course should say 30% more. Now, things don't always go as planned. I get a lot of my work rejected. When I give talks like this, especially in schools, I try to hammer this home to the kids that, I've been doing this for 24 years and counting, hopefully. And to this day, I get things rejected all the time for various reasons. Now, Augustin's next book, which will be out in about a month, is his humorous essays on Christmas with this wonderful title. And this should have been a no-brainer. This should have been very easy. Now, of course, the obvious solution would be to get a picture of some kid sitting on Santa's lap and screaming his head off. Now, the problem with that is an entire book of those photos had just come out last December when I was working on this, and Chronicle published it. So they had that that cornered. And so I had to go on. Now, at the same time, I started to get emails, a blog from another photographer friend of mine named Thomas Allen, who I've worked with before, who started a blog called The 12 Tawdry Days of Christmas. And so what he did every day was he went into a Goodwill in Wisconsin where he lived, and he picked one sort of horrible Christmas gewgaw every day and posted them. And so one of which happened to be this stupid little china figurine of this girl freaking out with a Christmas wreath in her hand. Now, Augustine, I sent it to him first, which can be a dicey proposition, but we're friends. And he said, it's cute, but it's not scary enough. So, and it's not mean enough. That was the key word. It's not mean, and I want mean. So I went back to Tom Allen, who was proceeding with his 12 Tawdry Days of Christmas, and found this Santa Claus, candy holder, ceramic, and his sack is hollow. And so he stuffed a few figurines in there to be mean. And I said, well, I think this is a nice start, but let's get even meaner and go to firearms. And so he sent that to me, and I said, all right, I think this is really getting there, but now let's add a narrative and bring the little girl back. So this goes off to the publisher, St. Martin's Press, which is just over in the Flatiron Building. And a week goes by, and I hear nothing. And then another week goes by, and I hear nothing. Now, I'm sure Paula will agree, that's always a very bad sign. When somebody likes something, they're dying to tell you right away. And when you hear nothing, that means they either don't like it, or they don't like it and can't figure out how to tell you, or they don't like it and can't figure out how to tell you and have assigned it to somebody else. So sure enough, week 3, I get a phone call from the art director who says, we had in the marketing meeting, they just think this is too mean. So of course there's been a communication gap between the author and the publisher. But then the art director also said, we literally had a 10-minute discussion in the meeting about whether or not Santa Claus is showing the little girl his penis. And I'm thinking, what, the guns aren't enough for you? But instead, I said, do they want him to? And he said, no, they don't. So I had to start over. Now, so I start thinking about other goofy things that people do on the holidays. And if you go online, you'll see this all the time. There are rife with pictures of people and their pets and dressing them up to celebrate the various holidays. And nothing says let's celebrate, let's praise our risen Lord, like clamping a pair of bunny ears onto your cat, or turning him into a sacrificial lamb, or, best of all, the quacky hat. Now, of course, this is the wrong holiday, so we've got to steer it back towards Christmas. And there's certainly no shortage of these either. I wanted the pet itself. This is just wrong. Somebody spent a lot of time and effort on their dog for that. It's not a good thing. This I like because it reminded me of Dr. Seuss. But for sheer sort of morbidity, you can't really beat that. I mean, he really looks like he's about to burst into tears. But even better, getting back to mean, is this guy. And I thought, well, this just seals the deal. And so I sent it off to the publisher, and 1 week goes by, and I hear nothing, and 2 weeks go by, and I hear nothing. So I know I'm fearing the worst. And sure enough, by week 3, the art director called and said, you know what, thanks a lot, but we solved it in-house. Just bill us a kill fee. And so that was the end, and I don't know what they ended up with. So I'll be surprised along with everybody else. This is a book that's out now. It's by David Kessler, who was the former Surgeon General of the United States, and he contacted me personally for this book that was originally called Sugar, Salt, Fat, which I just leaped at. I mean, that's the kind of title that any book designer, just wants to eat up, frankly. And then he changed it to The End of Overeating, and my heart just sank, because how do you show the end of overeating? You can't really, but it's really about changing people's eating habits, and this book has been a really big deal, and it's on the bestseller list, blah, blah, blah. But I started to think about, all right, what's a sort of like thing that you can eat that's not good for you, but you could sort of kid yourself or talk yourself into the fact that it's good for you. And I decided on carrot cake. That's good for you, it's made from carrots. Delicious carrot cake. Right down to the stupid little illustration that they do of a carrot rendered in icing on the top. So really the idea is put away the carrot cake and eat the carrots. And this guy, the author, he's really funny, but he called me up and he said, I just love this. It took me 6 months to figure out why it works. 6 months? Yeah, yep. Then I finally figured it out. It's the icing. Yummy icing. That was it. That's why he liked this cover. This is also just out now. This is a collection of essays by Paul Rudnick. You may or may not know who he is. He writes for The New Yorker magazine. He writes for the theater. And he writes for movies. He wrote the screenplay of both the Addams Family movies. So if you've seen either of those, you know his work. He's very funny. His aunt, he grew up in upper middle class New Jersey, and his aunt used to say, "I shudder," any time that there was something that she hated. Like Sarah Palin, I shudder. Ooh. I was going through images to try and find something that would be amusing, and I came across this one that was taken by a guy named David Graham at a wax museum in Houston, Texas. I don't know how easy that is to see, but basically it must have been very hot in the wax museum because Toto has slit in Dorothy's hands. And so it's sort of works sort of wonderfully with the title. And I thought, yay! I mean, this is totally Paul Rudnick's sensibility. Send it in to the publisher, and I did hear back fairly quickly. But basically, it's the art director said everybody laughed for 5 minutes in the meeting, and then we all agreed it's too gay. I was like, you fucking homophobes. So now we've got to think of something else. The subtitle is "And Other Reactions to Life, Death in New Jersey." This is just sort of like a goofy play on walking your dog and not walking him. This is the Museum of Natural History. You can't see it real well, but they protected this because there's a bare breast on the cover. Thank you very much. And then this wonderful couple, this shot just kills me because I didn't alter the color in any way. There's no sun whatsoever in the sky. It's completely overcast, and yet they still have their umbrellas. This almost made it. The editor said, I like the image, but the type just isn't funny enough, which means nothing. But then you do this, and they're like, oh, yes, yay! But the publisher sort of killed that. And so then I went back, and they were focused on two of the essays towards the end of the book, which one is about coming to New York in the height or depth of the AIDS crisis, and he was in the theater world, and so it hit especially horribly hard there, obviously, and very, very moving meditation on that. And then he writes a whole essay on the fact that all he eats at all is junk food. And literally candy and dessert all the time. And he's thin as a rail, so go figure. But his favorite thing are those horrible little marshmallow chicks that you get at Easter called Peeps. And so I wanted to meld the idea of the AIDS crisis and the Peeps together. And the thing about Peeps is that they come in these strings. And so I just ate one of them. I just ripped one of them off. And they have this curious little look on their face like, you just ate that guy next to me. Am I next? And so that was it. That seemed to work for everybody. So this comes out, I think it is out now. It just got reviewed in the Times. in August, I had this like incredible ideagasm week where I designed two completely different book jackets at the varying opposite ends of the spectrum of disturbing and adorable. One is that we're publishing the sequel to Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis, which is one of his creepiest, most horrifying books yet. And I came across this picture of this guy, and it's hard to explain, but he's basically part of a spiritual cleansing ritual somewhere down in South America or whatever. But it looks completely menacing and creepy. And then this guy, Alexander McCall Smith, who does the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, the like very warm homespun, and he wrote a book. His new book is called Corduroy Mansions, and it's about the sort of like threadbare goings-on, shabby chic in this hotel that people live at, which is called Corduroy Mansions. And reigning over the character that ties it all together is this little dog called Freddie De La Haye. And so, I said to the editor, like, let's put a puppy on the front. Why mess around? So there it is. And so both of these come out next summer, actually. But to do both of these in a week is the sort of thing that I get up in the morning for. And finally, I'm often asked, do I design the covers of my own books? Yes, sort of. I would more accurately describe it. I art direct them. I orchestrate them, put them together. And the learners, it's too difficult to go into exactly what it's about, but it deals with the Stanley Milgram obedience to authority experiments at Yale in the early 1960s, where people were tricked into thinking that they were shocking other people to death. At the time, I was editing Charles Burns's brilliant graphic novel called Black Hole, and I wanted to use him on this cover, so I got some swipe to show my publisher what I wanted to do. This is the first type treatment. I shuffled that around so it's balanced better. And so I showed this to my publisher and said, this is what I want to do. And they said, yay, it's great, it's done. And I said, no, it's going to look like this, only it's going to be better. We're actually going to hire this guy to do a drawing, and my friend Chris Ware is going to do the lettering. So I'm a terrible draftsman, but I am a narcissist. So I wanted this person on the cover to be me. So I gave, this is the reference that I gave the illustrator, Charles Burns. I'm not wearing these glasses today, but he's really great. So he goes to pencil, and then he goes to ink, and on the back, I want my eyes closed, so he does that. And then I show this shock machine that's used in the book, and he turns it into that. And so then my friend Chris Ware redoes all the lettering by hand, which is actually an integral part of the book. And there it is. The red part is a separate piece of paper, die-cut jacket. So when you take that off, then instead of the mouth, you get the machine going full throttle. And then finally, then it goes to paperback. And this is another question that I get a lot. Like, how does it determine what a paperback version should look like? And so what I wanted to do is keep enough of the old one, but then also change it enough so that you know that it's a new edition of the book. And that was really just about swapping out the colors. Chris had never been happy with the lettering, so he redid that. And then you put a quote on it, that says, "This book will cure your cancer," blah, blah, blah. And that's it. And so that's my website, which you are welcome to visit at your leisure.
That's me.
Oh,
I need
sorry.
the clicker. So, I don't want to crane my neck. So, I've been designing. My name is Paula Scher. Nice to meet you. I've been designing for 38 years. I'm probably been designing longer than most of you have been alive. And what I'm going to show you is actually the opposite of kid. I'm going to show you why I'm known. And I'm known differently dependent upon how old you are. And the way people think about me is different depending upon the point in time they encountered me. So I'm going to sort of take you through it from way back when to today as fast as I can. I had a great job at CBS Records, where I was art director, East Coast art director, producing about 150 album covers a year when I was 26 years old. And I began by doing things that were counter to what existed at the time, which was the Swiss International style. I worked with a lot of eclectic typography, which I loved, and I began exploring historical styles. This cover was done in 1977. And I began applying it to all sorts of things, and they got some notoriety and attention at their time. And what was fantastic about this stuff is these covers were 12 by 12 inches. They were great, big, gorgeous, luscious objects. The covers were global before I knew what global was. I'm still purchasing them when I go into antique stores around the world. And what was innovative about the work was at that particular point in time, people made big images on covers with illustrations and photographs, and type was secondary, and I sort of brought type to the foreground, largely because I did my best work on low-budget albums that nobody cared about, and so I did my best work with typography. This, at the time, which when it was designed in 1979, was considered extremely radical. As a matter of fact, I entered it in a lot of shows, and I got rejected from every show until about 3 years later. But the way the company liked me, and the way I really earned my living, was doing pop covers for records that sold millions and millions of copies. So something like the Boston cover, if you were a teenage kid in the 70s, this is completely emblematic to you. I can't tell you how many people go, "You did the Boston cover." For me, this is one of the most embarrassing pieces of work of my life. But my view of these things, and I still do them, is that I made a deal with the record business early in my career, and I actually do the same thing now, where I would solve problems where people had a lot of money at stake if I could make the trade to be able to do the kind of work I wanted to do. And I do that even today at Pentagram, where I'll take on some very big commercial job to support some pro bono work that I want to do. So I've been doing, this is another thing that probably everybody owned. And there were millions of these. I made probably more crappy covers than good ones in those days, but this is what stayed with me. Funny that you mentioned Less Than Zero, because this poster is actually mentioned. There's a full page of writing that describes this Trust Elvis poster in Brad Easton Ellis's book Less Than Zero, which was amazing when I read it. I designed the poster in 1982, and I think the book came out in 1984, and it was referred to as the old Elvis Costello poster, which shows you how fast you age in this business. Things just speed around very fast. So there's a whole group of people who only know me for this. You know, it's either Boston, eclectic typography, or this. And right after I did this poster, which was in 82, actually this was 80, I'm sorry, I take it back. I left CBS Records and I started my own company. And I had a partner named Terry Coppell, and I used what I was known for, which was historic type, to get business. So we launched our business with a book called Great Beginnings, and it used this very historical type to demonstrate the beginnings of famous novels and the style and period in which they were written. And about this time, or about a year later, this work became known as historicism. I did an identity for Manhattan Records that used Broadway boogie woogie, but probably the most infamous piece of work was the Swatch Watch poster designed in 1994, which was a parody of a Herbert Matter poster for his Swiss Air campaign. And this thing is still written about. I mean, in 1984, I think, is about 20, I can't do the math, 26, 27 years ago. I mean, this is still a hot topic about whether it was plagiarism or not, etc. In fact, it was a parody. I paid a permission to use the poster. Herbert Matter was credited on it. Everybody kind of knows that, but the idea of how you use history became this sort of debatable discussion. And for a long time, this thing was infamous. It was bad for me. Like, I stopped showing it because people would hiss and boo, and it would be some terrible thing. Now it's come around the other way, where it's this iconic breakthrough in postmodernism, and all the museums all over the world have collected it. And I just actually don't know how to feel about it. I was sort of doing a job, which is kind of what you're doing when you're doing your work. And the reason I did the poster was because when I was working for Swatch Watch, they actually had Herbert Matter posters hanging in their offices, and they were, in fact, a Swiss company. So the parody itself actually made sense. The end. I used that sort of the notion of historic style to do all forms of work in the 80s. This was my first retail establishment called Ula, which was a candy store where I used steel as a sort of a basis for doing a lot of packaging. And I did things any way I could. I did this cover for the American Institute of Graphic Design's annual in 1989, and I painted it by hand and wrote sort of a narrative of what design was in America. And what I did is I listed every single state in the United States, and the percentage of people who used Helvetica was sort of my basis for it. And at that particular time, the reason I did it was because when the AIGA called me, they told me they had $1,000 for expenses, but no a design fee. And I said, well, what happens if you don't have any expenses? And they said, well, you can keep the $1,000. So I painted the whole cover by hand because I didn't want to pay anybody else, which meant I had to do the back cover, etc. But you'll see later that this actually led me to begin painting, simply because I liked the result of it. I joined Pentagram in 1991, mostly because I was a woman in business, and at that point my partner, Terry Coppell, had left, and I wanted to get bigger paying jobs, so I didn't have to like paint by hand to keep the $1,000. So at Pentagram, I began doing identities. Actually, the call for the public theater was really a Coppell and Scher call, because they called me from my old work. And I began working with George Wolfe and developed an identity system that relied on sort of Victorian typography to create a visual language for a theater. And I'd never done anything like this before because I'd only worked on relatively small identities, and it involved doing their building and, of course, posters for every single play. And this was all developed in 1994. These are various posters for them. I do the Shakespeare in the Park posters every summer, and probably the most emblematic of this whole series was Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk, which happened, there were a series of posters and images that happened from 95 to 98. And the first one that I showed you actually started out downtown when the play opened at the public, and then gradually it moved uptown. This was for Broadway. And then there were a series of posters all over New York City. And something peculiar happened to me with this. The stuff became so well known that it became a style and everybody began doing it. And that was actually terrible for the public and terrible for me. It meant I had to go back and figure out what I was going to do for them. And in fact, New York City ate the public theater's identity for a while. So I started changing the typography, and I did all the posters differently, sort of stretching it as far as I could. But it actually was bad for the theater because even though the posters had typographic reach, there was no recognizability to it because the public theater didn't advertise as much as, say, a Broadway play like Chicago, so they didn't have any massive cumulative effect. So I recently went back and redid their identity again last year and connected everything so it's much tighter and much more structured as an identity, so every single piece is identifiable as the public. It means the posters are less individualistic on the one hand. On the other hand, I think it's more successful for the theater. We're currently involved in doing the lobby right now and reconfiguring the whole thing. The public theater work, people assumed because I put type up in the lobby that I actually understood architecture. And I started to get hired to do environmental graphics by real architects. And I can't figure this out because I still, to this day, am really bad at reading an architecture plan. But for some reason, I started to understand what type would look like in space. And I found that it was an enormous amount of fun, particularly in theaters, to do this sort of work because theaters actually provide that kind of opportunity. They are, in fact, theatrical. At New 42nd Street, I designed typography on the floor and on the walls because actors and actresses take their cues from the floor. And then I was hired to do another performing arts school, which was this disgusting building in the Lucent Technology gave to the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, and they only had $100,000 for a budget to fix it, so I covered it with typography. And the building is just painted by hand. And guys got up there with sort of different glassines and just lettered all over the building. I did it in more expensive materials uptown at Symphony Space. This is Jim Polshek's renovation, another building that's sort of lathered with type. By the time I finished this, it had become another popular style, and all kinds of graphic designers began doing signage this way. It really didn't exist that much before I did it, but then I found myself competing with people who did it better with bigger budgets and for more expensive materials. This is the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, where I did the whole building signage in plastic. This is the donor signage with dowels and sort of cheap plastic signs coming out of the hall, and my favorite bathroom sign. And I do everything for Madison Square Park. The reason I do it is because when they came around to ask me if I would do the graphics for the park and ultimately Shake Shack, they said, if you won't do it, we'll take it over to Chermayeff and Geismar, who lived across the street, and I didn't want to have to look at their graphics, so I doing the job for. Probably the most upscale version of my sort of out-of-scale typography was for Bloomberg's headquarters, which were these giant lucite letters that ran floor to ceiling and are encased in glass in the space and work very well with the architecture, and floor numbers that bend around, and Lisa Strasfeld's programmed LED that works on the same system. I make my money doing giant, big, fat corporate jobs like the Citibank job, which I worked on for about 12 years, and I actually I have affection for my client there. I drew the logo on a napkin in the first meeting and have been stuck with it ever since. Everything you see comes from a manual that we designed. Also the same with Tiffany, where I repackaged them in 1998 and created some standards for them and gave them a basis for how they position their logo type and color. And I do lots and lots of cultural identities. I seem to get one after the other. These are actually, you're getting up to very contemporary times. This was done, I think, 3 or 4 years ago when Peter Gelb took over the Metropolitan Opera. And my big problem with these identities is that I do them and they are taken over in-house, and the politics sort of override them, and they get virtually trashed. So what I've been concentrating on lately is actually what I'd call management consultancy, where I get inside the corporation and try to restructure how the art department's reporting structure to make sure that people can actually do their job properly once they have the kit of parts, which is sort of an interesting thing to do because it gives up my personal hand to a degree, but it gets more power for the art director so that the designs can be carried out better. The New York City Ballet was executed better than the Metropolitan Opera because I did a better job setting it up internally there. The New York Philharmonic less so because they hired an advertising agency that I think does not as strong a job as I would have liked. But we did some work for MoMA and also for Bard College recently that I think is executed brilliantly. This is the identity for the High Line, which I worked on from the day they walked in the door, and they didn't even have a single signature to get this thing up. And after 8 years, it's out, and we did the environmental graphics as well, and all the campaigns and every sort of piece of information for the High Line for the past 8 years. This is the system for MoMA, which was instituted last year, which is just a very simple tweak where we gave them a template for announcing program, positioning a logo, and sticking an image in. And Julia Hoffman, who used to be my senior designer, is currently there, and it's working like a charm. It's really, and it was largely because I took away the reporting structure where the curators don't have the ability to approve or not. It goes directly to the director of the museum, and that artwork can actually be cropped. It changed the whole way something works. It's so simple. I mean, it's not hard to make design good, but the power structure has to be right. It's everything. This is right up on the Pentagram blog today. It's the identity for Bard Graduate Center, which I did the identity for in 1992 and just recently redid. It's a module system that enables the identity to work in every single form and be recognizable in every single form. Just a broad visual language. This is the website. At the same time, when I started doing Citibank, I began painting these like really elaborate, really complicated maps. I had started doing it with the AIGA cover, and I started making them bigger in 1998 because the Citibank job was so long and so boring that I felt like I just had to paint on a wall and lose myself in trivial information. Also, what was great about it is I controlled the information, so I could put things in the wrong spot. This was at the Cooper Hewitt for about 6 months, and people used to walk up to the map and say, I've been there. And of course, they couldn't have been because it's in the wrong spot. These maps are, just absolutely laden with information. This is the Bush-Gore election in Florida, and all the results are in the water. It's a very depressing map, actually, if you read it. And I got a gallery, quite by accident, and the gallery started selling these. And I had a couple of exhibitions, and the paintings sold, which was something I never expected to happen because I was sort of goofing around and just sort of exercising. Then the gallery started making prints of the paintings, and we started selling the prints of the paintings as well. They're complicated silk screens. Here's a couple versions of the United States. Painting over the silk screen, another one where I just took all the color out of it. And the most recent thing I've been doing is I got some commissions from 1% for the Arts, where I'm actually taking the paintings and they're made into environments, and we're doing a public school in Queens. And this is the painting for it. It's a painting of Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, and I'll just show you a virtual reality of it because it's actually being repainted by a mural installer, and it is going to consume about 12,000 square feet. It's in a room with an atrium, and the painting starts up at about 10 feet off the ground and then continues up another 12 feet. So this will give you a sense of how it fills the space. So it's moving, you're getting nauseous, it's coming around, sort of flips around, and then you get deeply into Queens. They proofread the painting. I did have to make typewritten corrections in the misspelling. And that's about 38 years. So, do you want to talk or ask?
I am humbled by all of that. That's just amazing. What do you? To what extent? Like when I see all that public stuff, and I just love going down in the subway, and all of a sudden there's a new public poster, and it's just like, wow, that's just so great. The impression I get is that you're not getting a lot of interference there. It really looks to me like you're doing exactly what you want to do. I don't see, it doesn't, I mean, it's about the most undesigned by committee I would ever imagine, and yet the public, so what is that situation?
The situation is rare, and it's really what I was talking about when I talked about financing the work I want to do. I do the public for totally free. They pay me nothing. I'm on their board.
Literally nothing?
Nothing. Zero. As a matter of fact, I learned something. Like there are pro bono-ish clients that come around and they want to pay you a little something. Better to do it for nothing, because when they pay you something, they think they have a right to say something about it. When they pay you zero, you do what you want. And
wow.
What I have to do, I mean, the hard part with the public is that there are these sponsors, and you do have to pay attention. You know, the thing where you get all the crap on the top with the millions of logos and stuff like that.
But even that, was just so brilliant to see the way you handled that. That one, the skull with the green afro, that was one of the first where I noticed because you have to take all these horrible logos. Like I've done a couple of posters like this where
millions of logos.
Millions of logos. Like how on earth do you make that look, in any way palatable? And you did, and you kind of wove them into this whole fabric of stuff going on at the bottom.
Well, that's because I have control. But the control comes, I have to say, it isn't just the zero factor. It's the fact that I've been doing it now for 15 years, and I'm actually embedded into the culture of the organization, which never happened before, and that you can only actually achieve that doing it that long a period of time, which is interesting. And I think it's very similar to your status as a book jacket designer. No, it's true, because you work with the most famous, most important authors and have managed, I mean, Chip showed you this year, but what astounds me is he's done blockbuster bestsellers where the quality of the jacket in a political situation is amazingly high. And that comes from your stature. It's not just that the ability to do it, because you wouldn't get it through without somebody acknowledging that Chip Kidd did the cover. I mean, which is part of how fame works a bit, because it does work for you after a period of time.
A little bit, but for better or worse, I feel like I'm starting over each time. And I'll tell you, like that Augustin Burroughs thing, like really threw me, because like we're friends, and I had his backing. Like he liked the Pitbull one, and it just didn't happen. So that was a wake up call, definitely. But I'm getting back to what you said, which I just loved with MoMA, is you managed to like get the curators out of the way. How did you do that?
I'm starting. I'm like into this sort of new phase where I'm really more interested in how good design gets made than whether or not I personally make it. Because I found that if I make it, it just dies anyway unless I figure out the condition to have it stay made. And my book Make It Bigger, and I don't know if any of you have ever read it, there's like an organizational chart about how things get approved and sort of going up ladders. And I wrote it about a job I had in 1972, and I have to say, in all these years, nothing has really changed about approvals and the way people perceive things. Some people will say something because they can. Some people will be not knowing what to say but think they have to out of fear. Some people think that there are strict rules about things, that there's a moral obligation to adhere to that aren't accurate. I mean, if you take curators in museums, they're thinking that the piece of work that's on the promotional piece is the piece of work. It's not. It's a promotional piece for the piece of work. And they don't understand that, and you can't have that argument with them. You actually have to jump above them and have somebody say, it's not cost effective to have you in the process, and we're making the rule that we can crop work because we can make a more effective piece of promotion. I can't do that. I can only get Glenn Lowry to do that. And that's what Glenn Lowry did. Now, Glenn Lowry did it because they had an art department that was getting worse and worse and worse by this kind of interference with the curators. And it wasn't just the curators, it's various levels of people at MoMA. And I actually made an organizational chart to show how many people had their hands in the art director's work and how it would be absolutely impossible for anybody, regardless of their talent, to do the job that way. So at a certain point in time, it has to be a senior person who wants to accomplish stuff. I mean, like the public, it's actually not that different because Oscar Eustace, even though I say they pay me nothing, he knows he'll get a better job if he keeps everybody out of the process. The minute everybody comes in, it gets weakened. But you have to have the right client for that. Some people don't get that at all.
Right. It's really
rare.
Something. It is rare.
But I'm thinking about writing about it more because I do think it's at the heart of everything. I mean, also, what's scary to me now, and I don't know if you feel the same way in terms of seeing other design work going on, is the notion of teams. Because the problem with the collaboration of teams is that if everybody's equal on a team and everybody has an opinion, that means it's going to neutralize the quirk factor in work that makes it terrific, which means everything will be rounded out. And that there is an emerging sort of, desire to have all things done as teamwork with people collaborating on huge things. And I actually think it's not great for design.
I mean, I'm consider myself very lucky in that in some ways, I've stayed small. I'm too small to fail now. Part of what really appealed to me about book covers, when I started at, I can say this now, I guess, unembarrassingly. When I started at Alfred A. Knopf in the fall of 1986 as the assistant to the art director, and the salary was $15,500 a year. Yes! And I'm like, okay, I'll just live in the street. And it's all right. one of the things they said is you can do freelance work on your own time using our facilities. It's like ka-ching. And for every book jacket that you design, your name will go on the back flap. And even, the snot-nosed 21-year-old dope that I was realized that that was as good as money. And that here, and to this day, I mean, album covers, which are, for all intents and purposes, dead, and book jackets is one of the rare forms of graphic design where you get credit for what you do right there, and it's relatively prominently placed. And so even back then, I realized, that's a really important thing. Whatever I do, my name will go on it.
And your mom gets to see it.
That's right.
That was always really important when I was doing album covers. My mother never knew whether the thing was good or bad. She always just turned around to read my name.
Sure.
That's the whole point.
I like going into people's apartments in New York, right? And, you pull the book cover down. It's like, that's me. It works.
It is great.
But seriously, because what I really wanted to do when I came to New York was work for a big design firm. And top on my list was, a Pentagram or M & Company is where I really wanted to work. And there was always that sort of what if factor. I think
you have an amazing path because you almost have an atelier situation in a job, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's true.
That's really unique.
It's true.
Would you explain to the audience about your situation at Knopf and how it works? And
I'm afraid because I keep thinking, I'll come to work one day and there'll just be all these, the police or something to escort me away. It's kind of what I just described in that I'm on staff there. But a great thing is, regardless of what that says, I'm actually not the art director. That would be a problem. Basically because it's such a huge responsibility. And I have a boss, a wonderful woman named Carol Devine Carson, who's been there almost as long as I have. And she is the art director. And so she has, if Anne Rice is decided that she's written a novel about Jesus Christ and everyone's freaking out, that's Carol's problem. It's not mine, and unless Anne Rice wants me involved somehow. But so I'm this sort of I'm the number two. I'm the Spock of Knopf, and so I have far less responsibility, frankly.
But you're like an artist in resident in a way because you're actually an attraction for their authors.
It can be that way. And then I also I've developed this role in the last 9 years there of basically jump-starting and reinventing the graphic novel program at Pantheon, which is a fancy way of saying comics and comic books. But that's I didn't begin to try and go, I said I was editing Black Hole, and that pulled that into the cover of my book. Yeah, that's a really great, deep love and passion of mine. And so the idea that I could turn that into part of my day job was pretty amazing.
So do you think we should do some Q&A?
Yes, certainly.
Does anybody want to raise their hand? We like questions. Oh, they're shy. Oh, good.
Yeah, here's a question. I guess for both of you. Chip, when you were going through your sequence of work, it seems like you submit your concepts one at a time. Do you ever provide choice? Do either of you ever provide options to your clients, or do you just say, this is the concept, take it or leave it, if you don't like it, I'll go back to time again?
The question is, do we just show one thing or a choice, and how does that work? And I'll just quickly say, what I try to do is arrive at the single best solution for a problem, and then I show that. So I really thought for Paul Rudnick that, the Dorothy with the Toto that's falling and looking dead was it's so perfect that that's all I sent them. And then when that got rejected, then I go into this sort of panic mode, and then I'll show 2 or 3 things together. But then I get worried that it gets to be too much like throwing something at the wall and seeing if it's going to stick. I have had pretty good luck, I think, with showing the solution and usually it's agreed upon.
I do it in relationship to the fee. In other words, when I worked at CBS Records, I worked exactly the same way Chip did. But when I'm doing identities, what I really try to do and what I write into the proposal is to show three and to show a direction that's out in left field, a direction that's very conservative, and something in the middle. And because I find that in getting huge groups of people to sign off on identity, which is no easy feat, they have to find a level of comfort. And I don't even know what that level of comfort is because it's too personal. And you have to get this group to sort of all wear the same dress. And that, you want to give them at least a bit of a closet to pick from. So that's what I tend to do. And I actually enjoy it because I like to see, it's sort of a challenge to see if you can design it from these different angles and pull it together. And if all I want is for them to be equally good. I never present anything that I wouldn't be just as happy if they picked it, because they will.
Yes, that's the other thing. If you come up with two really good solutions, but you want to show them three for the sake of showing them three, so you come up with a lame one, they'll pick the lame one.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, don't do that.
Is somebody, yes?
Yes.
This is a question for you. You mentioned that you started painting for the bank job, but now it seems like the painting is sort of living a life of its own. You have gallery shows, you're doing commissions. Now your outlet has become work again, it seems.
It's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah, it's a real problem because there are deadlines. There's clients. I made type corrections. Good God, what is this? So and also, and I didn't get into it a lot when I was talking, but all my work is a reaction to the work I did before it. I really like I'm exactly the opposite of Chip. Like I could never do one thing, meaning a genre, not a style, but book jackets. I did 10 years of record covers and I couldn't make another square again. I really need the breadth to try different things. And what I find is that after I've done three of something, I'm suddenly an expert, I get repetitive, the work gets boring, and I need to shift. And I feel like that's happened with the paintings, and I'm looking for another way to move them. And I don't have any time for R&D, which you need to make something grow, because I'm delivering commissions, and that's bad. It really is. So I'll sort of struggle through it and figure out what the next thing is, which I absolutely don't know. I mean, I've never been more confused about what I want to do next than I feel right now, actually.
But you know what? You always say that. I mean, I've known you for, 15 years?
20.
20. And you
I
always...
met you with your portfolio out of Lanny Samisa's class.
That's right. But you do sort of, forgive me.
whine.
You seem like you are always saying that.
I always feel that.
Well, all right, but that's interesting. That's interesting because, I have, creative friends or cartoonists or whatever that, some of them just piss and moan the whole time, and yet they produce like crazy. I mean, like Chris Ware is a perfect example of when you talk to him on the phone, he says, "Oh my God, I'm just the worst. I'm just awful. I just did this blah 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 blah," and then, and it's all genius. And that's how I feel about your stuff. Totally.
I think it's like that motivates you,
Yes, but I think that's interesting. That's interesting because then I know people who feel this way and don't do anything because of it, which is sad. It's sad because
I know that
certain, and we
Well,
all know people
I think it's interesting I think what you and I both have really strongly in common is the determination to get something that we made up made.
Yes,
absolutely. That's really the whole point. Like if you make the thing and the thing doesn't happen, it doesn't get made, it's killed, it doesn't see the light of day, is phenomenally depressing. It's like you never made it. So that what keeps you walking. It's like breathing a bit. It's like I'm going to get this thing to happen.
I could not agree more. I think I wrote one screenplay in my life. I adapted my first novel as a screenplay, and it was interesting and fun, but it's not getting made. And I'm like, no wonder these people kill themselves. I mean, it would just... like to work on stuff that wasn't going to happen, it's just amazing to me. Like, and I know a lot of people in the movie business that are like that, and I just think, oh,
The
how?
advertising business is like that. You can work on campaigns and nothing seems the light of day. How many of you are architects? Anybody here architect? Because I find that all the environmental graphics and architecture is incredibly frustrating because it's like 8 years and the thing can be trashed.
Yeah.
8 years of your life and it didn't get made.
Yeah, yeah, amazing,
You know, it's
amazing.
horrible. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. First, I'd like to let you know those are great work of art. I love the hand, and I love also the map. The question is, what moves you? What inspires you? A lot of times you mentioned advertising, you deal with the client. Direction changes through time, and you have the deadline next day. How can you come up all of a sudden with a new idea?
I don't know. I always say that I'm inspired by whatever the project is. And one of the benefits, for the most part, of working on books is that you don't have these crazy deadlines. That when I get a manuscript to read, I've got a month, and so I read it and I let it live in my head and then sort of take it from there. I think with somebody like, honestly, when Augustine Burroughs said, my new book is called Possible Side Effects, for some reason, it's like six-fingered hand. It was instantaneous. And I think that comes from doing this a lot and developing your intuition, developing your intuitive powers. And then there's a lot of luck involved.
I feel like a ketchup bottle, like you sort of turn me upside down and squeeze me and something comes out unless I'm empty. And then sometimes that happens and I just got to be refilled. There is no way to accurately describe how you get ideas. That as a human being, you're absorbing things all the time, and that what you want is to spit them out in the right combination in relationship to some given assignment or direction. But to say, how do you do this and write A, B, C, D, and E is absolutely, I think, impossible.
Yeah.
It's the biggest mystery. But it's there because you keep doing it, and you get comfortable trusting your own intuition. What's terrible is when you question yourself. That's actually really, really quite rough. I mean, refinement is different from questioning yourself. That you get an idea and you refine until it's working. But editing yourself too strongly can be prohibitive.
I just had a question about, you guys probably get this question every time you guys speak, especially for students like myself, but what would you have for basic advice, if going out, once you're done with school or even interning, what's the best, advice that you give to aspiring designers that want to get out there and do a good job?
I would advise two things. Try to get a job where you like the work that's getting made in the place. There's no point in even if you have to work for free, there's no point in taking a job in a place where you don't respect the work. It's best if you can learn from somebody and see how they work and see how they think. And the second thing is to expect everything to change all the time. Those are my two best pieces of advice.
Those are pretty good. There's two things. First of all, I think you need three things. You need to have some talent. Then you need to work like hell constantly to hone that talent and constantly try to get better. And then you need to get lucky. Big thing. Now, the other thing I would say is, like I said, when I came to New York, the model, I majored in graphic design as an undergrad 4 years. And so the model was a Pentagram or a Pushpin or an Emin company, where it's yes, I want to work for an exciting design firm that's doing all these different kinds of things, and that would just be the best thing ever. And I interviewed at all those places, and nobody was offering me a job. And then I went to Random House to get freelance book jacket work, and there was a full-time position there. And I had the presence of mind to say to myself, I think I should do this now. This wasn't what I had in mind, but I certainly respected Knopf. I mean, the best publisher in the world. So I thought, all right, let's give this a shot. So that's sort of like, it's great to be focused and know what you want, but if reality is pointing you somewhere else, and you've got to be open to that. You've got to be open to that, especially in this job market. That, you know, there may be something that you get offered that wasn't what you had in mind, but you might have to really seriously rethink that.
Great. I guess we're done.
What?
I guess we're done.
I'm sorry?
I said, I guess we're done.
Yeah.
Just ask, you mentioned percent for art.
Yes.
I may be horribly naive, but I am familiar with the program, and I'm not sure if everybody else is. I know it's something that I just discovered fairly recently, but I think it's a wonderful part of New York. If you can just expand on it so people know a little bit more about it.
Yeah, that's true. The city is very mysterious to designers. I mean, I also happen to be on the design commission, and I've really become familiar with the various programs the city has for buildings and artists and things like that. And Percent for Art is something that has existed a long time. It essentially takes a budget for any kind of base building that's put up by the city, which is, it could be the public theater, there's a commission inside the public theater, or it could be a public school, or anything that the city builds. And they take 1% of the overall entire budget and set that aside for a piece of fine art to be made. And there's a list of fine artists that are seem to be gathered by people in the New York City Department of Culture, which is run by Kate Levin. And there's a whole little group of people that run Percent for Art, and they will bring 4 or 5 artists in on a given project to make a presentation of what you would do in the space. And it's, I think that if any of you are practicing artists, you might want to find out how to get on the list or get somebody to see your work. And the city is demands that buildings do this. So architects know they have to collaborate with artists in public spaces. Thank you. We get to eat.
Okay.
So we're going to break for lunch. Just real quick note, we have a treat for you. Today we have Asia Dog Catering, and so that is organic hot dogs with Asian-inspired toppings, all locally sourced from the green markets. So enjoy, mingle. We're going to probably come back around like 1:45. Feel free to bring your food with you, because we have a food panel coming up. So organic produce, yeah, mentioned, yeah. Okay.